Mr. Valašek, what is the worst thing that can happen at the NATO summit next week?
Who knows is the honest answer. I mean, the one thing that's fairly clear is that President Trump of 2018 is different from President Trump of 2017. He seems to have grown more comfortable in his skin, more willing to shake up the status quo, consequences be damned. So, there are genuine worries about what comes out of these summits. The assumption is it is probably not going to be any better than the 2017 summit, which was already fairly abrasive. The sort of dueling press conferences on what are the European allies doing or not doing on defense spending, the unwillingness to commit explicitly to Article 5, meaning the alliance's defensive mutual defense clause. So the baseline assumption is it will probably be as bad. But who knows? The usual bias that we make in assuming that the next summit, the next meeting is going to be like the previous one, doesn't necessarily apply to President Trump because he fashions himself and he behaves. It's trademark to be a disruptor. Therefore, the possibility of something, of a discontinuity, of a change in U.S. policy on NATO can no longer be discounted.
Do you think that he can go as far as saying, I will not sign the final communique unless Germany commit to 2% within X amount of years? Is that possible? They can do something like that?
Who knows? And that's the only honest answer. It is possible. There may be a case that the United States would want to reduce the amount of money they spend on U.S. forces in Europe and link that to the increases in European defense budgets. That's a possibility. But I suspect not even everybody in President Trump's entourage, much less those of us on the outside, know exactly what will happen. The president has fashioned a role for himself as not just a disruptor, but a man of surprise who believes it is in his tactical advantage to keep everybody else in the dark, including, again, many in his own entourage, until the last moment. So that makes any predictions about what happens at the summit very, very difficult.
What would be the outcome of the Trump-Putin meeting in Helsinki on the 16th?
It's fair to assume that the U.S. president, goes into the meeting hoping for a visible sign of a breakthrough. His modus operandi with these meetings, whether it's the Kim Jong-un summit or others, is that he wants to be seen as the man who has succeeded where others have tried and failed. So it is safe to assume that he will approach the Helsinki meeting as an opportunity to show him and nobody but him as being uniquely, exclusively capable of getting better cooperation between the United States and Russia on Syria, perhaps the same on Ukraine, some sort of a breakthrough or at least a reversal of the current disintegration of the arms control system between U.S. and Russia. I assume these are all things that he will want to accomplish and want to visibly demonstrate to his voters and the nation that he has made real progress on any of those. I would caution against the assumption that any explicit agreements or any explicit bargains come out of it. This may well be a meeting that ends with a vaguely worded communique and a press conference, in which statements about great progress are made, which may or may not translate into government action later on. But it's safe to assume, again, that the purpose of meeting President Putin is to convey to the world that I, President Trump, have succeeded where others have tried and failed, but I have managed to get cooperation on traction on Syria, on Ukraine, and other issues. And I made America and the world a safer place as a result of it.
So we will not see the US suddenly taking away all sanctions on Russia or accepting that Crimea is annexed?
We have already seen the US president question essentially current standing US and European policy by saying, well, Crimea has a lot of Russian speakers. Perhaps the action was legitimate. I wouldn't at all rule out the possibility that something like that it will be said at the press conference. But I also don't assume that it will necessarily therefore translate to a change of official U.S. policy. Again, the pattern of the past was statements that don't often then actually translate into meaning consequential change in U.S. policy on the given issue. So I wouldn't rule out a statement on Crimea. On the bigger issue of what is it exactly that might be agreed or given up, again, my sense is President Trump is about creating the appearance and the effect. He will want to convey the message and create the appearance that real, meaningful, successful progress has been made. But on what issues that is, again, we assume it's those that I mentioned: Syria, Ukraine, arms control, possibly a statement of non-interference in each other's elections. Don't forget the other big domestic issue for the president is the cloud of suspicion hanging over him that he may or may not have been elected with the help of the Russian government. He will therefore want to seek the summit to dispel that notion. So I imagine the possibility of an agreement in which Russia and President Trump say, we have never interfered in each other's electoral systems, and therefore, of course, we agree never to do so in the future. Why would we? We have never done so. And that's something that would, of course, suit President Trump domestically. Will that translate to the lifting of sanctions? Not easy at all, because and there's different kinds of sanctions the United States has imposed on Russia over the years. Most of them are either imposed via congressional action, so it's an act of law that will require a vote in Congress where the president isn't trusted on Russia and therefore doesn't have the votes. And as an evidence of that, even those sanctions that were not passed by law, they were passed by simple act of president and through executive action, are actually now sort of boxed in by law because because Congress has essentially said that if the president tries to lift those sanctions that are only imposed through a presidential order, Congress will immediately snap them back on via an act of law. So on sanctions, the president is pretty tightly boxed in by Congress, which clearly doesn't trust him to execute the Russia policy in America's best interest.
Mr. Valašek, thank you very much.
My pleasure entirely.